Hi everyone, this is Axel from dreamsanctuary.net. Though I consider my dream series to be finished, I thought I would add this extra episode to start a conversation on the limits of dream interpretation. As anyone who watched the series knows, I have a set of guidelines to do dream interpretation, which I have adapted from Robert Johnson's inner work. Whether you use his method or mine doesn't really matter, I consider them to be interchangeable. In both methods, there are some clear pitfalls to avoid. These are mistakes I've made 100 times and I still occasionally do them. I structured them as a checklist made of 4 points and I'll comment on them. The first one is that you should not approach dream materialistically, concretely, or literally. You have to approach them symbolically. So a dream is made of libido symbols. This is psychic energy, libido, whose meaning is made sensible through the symbol, through the appearance of the symbol. And that's why you should avoid taking the symbol literally, because the symbol is not the thing itself, but a doorway to the meaning contained by the psychic energy. The second point is that the interpretation should not teach you something you knew before, but something completely new. Here's an example. Someone brought to me a dream where they were angry at their father, and the first thing they said is, "Obviously I know that, I've always been angry at my father." Well, a dream is not going to waste your time, teach you something you've always known. The dreamer here is making the mistake of confusing his flesh and blood father with the dream father, the father as an archetype, as a symbol, as an image. On the third point, one must make sure that the interpretation is not self-congratulatory, but it must have a humbling effect on the ego. So let's say you have a dream where you punch someone to death and your interpretation is that, aha, I've vanquished over an adversarial part of my psyche. Well, that's the wrong interpretation. What you've done is you murdered an aspect of your own psyche. Can you feel the humbling effect? That's something I actively seek and try to get in an interpretation. It must feel like that. It must be this deflating effect. And the last point is that the interpretation should be focused on what's happening inside the inner world and not about the outer world. Of course, there's lots of things that's happening in the outer world, but the dream will focus on what's happening within, what is being experienced from within. So that should be the focus. Not events that happen in the outer world, that's the context, but how it is being experienced within. That's what the dream will be about. I stand behind those guidelines and this checklist. This has proven itself to be very reliable. However, that does not mean that every single dream you'll have will reveal its secret through those guidelines. And this is the topic of this video, is I've scoured the past 5 years of my dreams to find some where something unusual happened, something worth pointing out. So we will definitely focus on the exception, those odd dreams that happen once or twice a year that must be approached differently. For the first one, we'll talk about impersonal content. Here's the dream. I see a short guy coming to me. He looks like a character from the video game Deep Rock Galactic. I am an engineer and he says he wants to become one. I tell him that there's a difference between claiming the title and what one does, how one lives. So when I start working on this dream, I do my usual thing. I try to remember the dream and I don't judge it from the outside. I try to re-enter the dream, to re-experience it. And I try to stay close to the symbol of this little guy, engineer, video game character. And when I stay close to it, I try to get a feeling or an intuition or something that would guide my interpretation. How does it feel to be next to this? And even now, as I am re-attempting this, I'm focusing on the symbol and there's something in my being that's rebelling. This does not feel like me. This does not belong to me. This is something different. It's coming from somewhere else. This is not a personalistic aspect. This is something different. It's coming from outside. It's not mine. And when we look at the context, we see something that clarifies it. So before going to sleep, I received a message on social media from someone who wanted to learn everything they could from me. So now the dream will make sense. This person who sent me a message is this video game character that wants to become an engineer like me, and I see engineer as some kind of utility or support class. And I respond to him that it does not matter if he claimed the title, if he tries to learn from me. What matters is how he lives his own life, because that's the school, is how you live and what you do. So in this case, strangely enough, what is experienced through the dream is this impersonal content from this other person that's visiting me, and the dream is providing kind of the answer to the situation that left me a bit confused. He should not copy me or learn from me, but he should live his own life, and that would be his school to mastery. On the topic of impersonal content, here's another dream. I was helping my grandmother go in the pool. She nearly broke her foot as she entered. I started to look more intently at her as I was close to her. I saw holes in her skin that went through the bones, and the skin was bloody red. In the distance, I saw a double of her body with maggots in the holes of her skin. As I was helping her go deeper in the water, I had to move away because the sight and the smell became unbearable. Okay, so there's putrefactual symbolism all over this dream. That's a word for a transformation of the psyche that involves rotting, decomposition, and moving towards death. Now, in a similar way as the previous dream, when I re-enter the dream and I try to re-experience the feeling I had around this rotting grandma, something in my being rebelled, and I couldn't accept that this was just a dream grandmother, symbolic or archetypal aspect of the grandmother. And so I decided, though I would never recommend this, to go with this is actually my real grandmother. Once again, this is not something that's happening at the level of the mind or the intellect. This is something that's happening at the level of the feeling function, how the dream felt. Something was different about this dream. So I was worried about this, and I called my family and asked them if anything happened to my grandmother. And a few hours later, they told me she was just fine. But here's the kicker. 3 days later, my grandmother had a cardiac arrest and she was sent to the hospital. She did not die from that cardiac arrest, but she has never recovered, and she has required intensive care until the day she died. So what's going on here? Well, this is one of the very few dreams where I felt that the dream character wasn't symbolic, but a real person. These dreams are termed objective dreams by Jungian and Franz, and it's important to know that these dreams exist, even if they are very rare. It seems that if they are going to happen, they're going to happen around the death of a relative. For reasons that aren't clear to me, it has been empirically observed that death amplifies synchronicity. So these kind of dreams can happen just before or just after a relative die. So yeah, this is one of the very rare dreams where something different happened. And how do you know the difference between a subjective dream or an objective dream? And as Marie-Louise von Franz put it, this can only be decided through the integrity of the feeling function. So it's only by staying with the symbol you'll get a sense that it's business as usual or something very unique is happening. If you are interested in this topic, I can refer to you to On Dreams and Death by Marie-Louise von Franz, or by this interview in French called Dreams, Death and Destiny with Marie-Louise von Franz. I've made the English subtitles, and so if you're interested on the distinction between subjective and objective dreams, you can look at around 31 to 38 minutes. This gets us into a discussion about synchronicity and precognition. So was the dream I had about my grandmother synchronicity or precognition? It's going to depend how you define precognition. If you define precognition as an anticipation of future development, then sure, the unconscious can do that. It can absolutely anticipate future events, even ones where the ego has zero context or sense data. This is definitely possible. But if you're going to define precognition as anticipation of literal events, now we have a problem. In this grandmother dream, well, she didn't get into a pool, she didn't break a foot, I wasn't even there, so I cannot accept that this is some kind of divination or precognition at a literal level. I'm fully willing to accept that some people do have truly precognitive dreams. Why not? But in this case, it isn't. To make an additional point, I'm going to go to the scarab synchronicity. So a patient of Jung brought him a dream where there was a beetle in it, and Jung tried to make a point about what the meaning of the dream was, but the patient wasn't willing to accept it, and so Jung looked away and he saw on the window a beetle, and he handed the beetle to the patient saying, "This is the beetle from your dream," and that made a deep impact on the patient. It's important to note that this beetle is not local to Switzerland, so the way that it found itself in Jung's room is completely unusual, to say the least. Now, is this precognition or synchronicity? Obviously, this is synchronicity. We have an inner event, the dream scarab, and we have an outer event, the real scarab, and so they're tied by an acausal form of meaning that is contained by the symbol of the scarab. So the symbol of the scarab contains something important for the self-knowledge of the patient. Now, I understand this is a silly example, but now let me move to the second case, which has happened to me. Someone shared a dream where there was nuclear bombs, and he told me that this must be a precognitive dream because the next morning he opened the news and he saw an escalation of nuclear threat. And so he told me, obviously, his dream was precognitive. And I tried to make the point that no, this is synchronicity, that the dream and the article are both tied by the symbol of the nuke, and that should be used as an element for self-reflection and self-knowledge. But he didn't want to hear anything about this. To make this story clearer, and because nukes are fairly common dream symbols, I can explain the symbolism of the nuke. I've worked on this on an article on the anime series Paranoia Agent, which you can find on my website. The idea is that the nuclear bomb is a destructive coming into consciousness. This nuke is this thing that contains so much light, and light is a symbol for consciousness, that this threatens the stability and cohesiveness of the personality. The coming into consciousness is happening too fast, too quickly, there's too much to handle, and this appears in this destructive manner that is the nuke. So that's what the symbol is, and knowing that person's situation, I can vouch that this was the correct reading. It wasn't precognition, it was a synchronicity centered around the nuke as a destructive coming into consciousness. What other types of dreams are there outside of those objective dreams or dreams with impersonal content? Lucid dreams are one of them, and this is something I've tried when I was younger, around 20 years old, with this book by LaBerge, and I've never had much success about it. I know there's exceptional lucid dreamer out there, I'm not one of them. Every time I've focused on trying to gain lucidity, I will use for something like flying, and quickly something will go wrong, I will lose my means and wake up soon after. Here I'm talking really from my experience of trying to work with lucid dreaming and not being good at it. I would recommend people to not try to forcefully become lucid, but kind of rejoice or enjoy when it happens by itself. And when it happens by itself, you should try to go along with the dream, with the natural unfoldment, and not seize this moment of lucidity to do something else like flying or whatever. I would say that an immature use of lucidity would be an avoidance of the natural unfoldment of the dream, whereas a mature use of lucidity would be to lean into the dream and engage in a deeper form of conscious participation. That would be my recommendation around lucid dreaming. Next, something strange. It looks like it's possible to have someone else dream. This is not something that has happened to me. I can't point to any reliable dream where this happened, but I've heard Marion Woodman describe something that goes like this. She was with a patient and the patient brought her a dream, and as Marion was listening to the dream, she was completely arrested because this was not the patient dream, but this appeared to be her dream. And the explanation she gave is that what was in this dream was so painful to consider that Marion would have never worked on that dream unless it was brought to her attention forcefully by someone else. That's the explanation she gave. On his side, Robert Johnson, in one of his DreamWorks seminars, says that this has happened to him he had dreams that weren't his, but he hasn't given any example to illustrate the situation. So yes, this exists, and it's better to know that this can happen. Stranger still, it looks like there are people who dream an entire life in a single night. So sometimes it's 7, 9 or 12 hours of sleep, and they dream entire decades where they build families, have children, and then they wake up and none of that happened. I have no idea how to approach something like this. The grief and the loss must be astonishing, but yes, it exists, so we have to contend with that. I will link this post in the description box. Moving on to stranger territory, what about dream telepathy? This is the question whether an agent can transfer thoughts to a subject while the subject is asleep. Is it possible to influence someone's dream while they are sleeping? This has been observed by parapsychologists into laboratory settings, but obviously the mainstream scientific consensus rejects this. And if you're not taking this seriously, I'll just let you know that some people are, which get us into dream implantation or targeted dream incubation. This article says 40 sleep researchers have signed an open letter warning that large corporations such as Coors and Burger King, I think McDonald's as well in another article, were actively attempting to engineer the dreams of potential customers with a technique called targeted dream incubation. One of the researchers says, planting dreams in people's mind for the purpose of selling products, not to mention addictive substances, raises important ethical question. This looks like there's some kind of research on what technological means can be used to invade someone else's dream space. This could happen from a technological standpoint or with dream telepathy from the standpoint of another person. This is very creepy, but it's better to be aware of it now than later. Finally, here's a dream I don't even know how to label, and it's in 2 parts. The first one is, I was talking to a woman in a field. We arrived at the topic of spontaneity, and I said, I lost my spontaneity a while ago. She asked, since when? I paused and answered, since Atlantis. Then the dream shifted to me drowning in water. I knew I was dying, and I had to slowly remove my spirit from my body as best as I could. So the first part is still very dreamlike. We're talking about where is my zest for life? And it looks like the ego has lost it somehow, somewhere. The answer given is since Atlantis, which I'm not taking literally. This is a symbol for, I don't know, something like a previous civilization or linked with water. Then the dream shifts to me drowning in water. And I must emphasize there was nothing else but water around. And I was seeing my body from above, and I saw that the body was drowning, and I had to kind of gently, gracefully remove the spirit from the body to transition the death process. So I'm not exactly sure what's happening in this dream. Your guess is as good as mine. I suppose if I have to put a term on it, I relived some kind of traumatic event in such a way that it would bring healing or closure to it. Frankly, I don't know. This gets us into the last slide, which I titled Sleep Time and Parapsychology. And so if dreams are weird, and they are, it still remains one of the phenomena that can happen during sleep time. Or the phenomena could be sleep paralysis, so that's the top left image, out-of-body experience, that's the top right image with the Simpson, astral projection, near-death experience, that's the bottom middle picture, or even people who wake up with physical marks after an intense dream exactly at the location where something happened in a dream. I guess my point here is that during sleep time there's a lowering of conscious activity which seems to engage different kind of parapsychological phenomenon ranging from positive exploration to forceful confrontation. Out of those phenomenon, I've only had 2 or 3 not so important out-of-body experience, and I can clearly say that the quality of an out-of-body experience has very little in common with how a dream feels. Those are different experiences. And there's even other things, like I was sleeping in a dormitory and I remember waking up slightly, opening my eyes, seeing a ball of light, and then closing my eyes again, drifting to sleep. And so in just those 10 seconds, I've seen something unusual, and this wasn't a dream, this wasn't an out-of-body experience. I have no idea what it was. The larger point here is that a lot of things can happen in sleep time. Dreams are only one aspect of them. And that's it. This is only a short overview. It's by no means complete. It's meant to open a discussion on where dream interpretation, let's say, stop and other phenomenon begins. And because this video might be a source of confusion, I would say it's good practice to fully exhaust an interpretation through the guidelines I've put forward, but yet you have to keep the door open for something completely others. This is how I work. I always put the guidelines first and the checklist, and I have somewhere in the back of my mind the willingness to discard completely those guidelines and enter into the fully unknown. Now, those unusual dreams are rare, very rare in fact, and I'm fully willing to accept that it's completely different from some specific individuals, but I've got yet to see this in practice. I've been working with dreams around other people for somewhere around 5 years, and I've never had a complete need to put the guidelines aside to work on a different phenomenon. So that's how rare they are. Even when I'm looking for them, I can't find any of them. Thanks for your attention. I'll put links in the description box, and I'll see you in the next one.